Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today's episode, my guest is Dan Attias. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his last name okay. He is a television director, an author, and who has worked on series like Alias, Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, Homeland, and the series that I reached out to him for was Lost. He directed 2 episodes in season 1 and season 6 about Hurley and Hugo, but also how Lost was it conceptualized from beginning to end with all those connections and webs of character arcs and everything. It was a very fascinating conversation that I truly enjoyed, and I'm going to have him back on again to talk about his book in more depth, which you'll see in the episode. So here's, without any further ado, my conversation with Dan for Lost and all of his other projects. Well, tell me just in general how your journey as a director, a storyteller started. I know it's going back in time, but just trying to always interested in, how people's journey starts because I'm in the industry as well myself, so it's always fascinating to hear how people get into where they are and be where they are.
Yeah, it was kind of circuitous. I mean, I didn't grow up, into early adulthood really having any aspirations to be a director or, it wasn't until after I graduated university with a degree in English and an admission to law school that I started
Yeah.
to question, is this really what I want to do? I had always been I was an English major, so I love story and thought about possibly writing, but uh, it wasn't really until I got started on, I mean, I was about to start law school that I really questioned, is this something I want to do? And I realized I have no real enthusiasm for it. So I returned to Los Angeles where I was raised and just really as a kind of way to loosen myself up, I got drawn to acting. And not really at first with any interest in becoming a career actor, but I really wanted to, experiment with playing and with specifically with identity and also in the context of storytelling. So, because I was, very interested in story, but the acting really liberated me. And for about 3 years, I said I was very enthusiastic that, okay, this is what I want to do. But I didn't have the confidence to go out and try to do it. I just wanted to study, and I did a lot of that. Uh, and then I worked my way into film school really because I wanted to pursue acting. But in the course of film school, I had to make a film. In those days, it was with Super 8, which is, you nod your head. I'm glad you even know what it is. But I made the film, and that was the epiphany because I realized I was much better suited to direct than to act because, which is partly has helped me a tremendous as a director because I have such empathy for actors because I know how difficult it is, how challenging it was for me to have to put my personality, my defenses, all that to the side to play another part. And that was very challenging for me. And I realized that as a director, it appealed much more to my strengths, which is to see story and to uh, be able to participate vicariously with actors as they took the emotional risks that I was unwilling to take as an actor, to really sacrifice my, ways of dealing, presenting myself to the world, and put those to a side and let some new, entity emerge. Uh, and it became a very intimate process where I was actually a better actor directing other actors because I wasn't the one who was going to have to take the chances. But I made a film, and that was the epiphany. And then getting the job is always an individual journey, and it's like for me, I wound up transferring over to the film school. I mean, to the creative side of the film school, and uh, not having a thesis film I wanted to do. So I thought, well, until I have that, I'll apprentice myself to good directors by becoming an assistant director, not really knowing at the time that as an assistant director, you're really not assisting directing. You're really doing a lot of other things. But I got
Hmm.
into the Directors Guild program, the Assistant Directors Training Program, and I got to work as a trainee and then as a second AD in a lot of big films. E.T., The Extraterrestrial, um, One from the Heart that Coppola directed,
Right.
a Wim Wenders film, a Sam Fuller film. So I had a great training, and then I went back to film school, made a film, and won a bunch of film festivals, and I got started, and that was my entry into the business.
That's amazing. Um, it's I went through your IMDb, and as I was scrolling, the ET poster popped out, like, and Twilight Zone and Airplane. I think you had something to do with
Yeah,
Airplane. I
I
don't
was a trainee assistant director on Airplane. Yeah.
Yeah, which I remember watching back home in the late 80s, and I absolutely love that film. I mean, even now I was watching some clips of it on YouTube like a few weeks ago. It's such a classic and such an amazing film. But going to your career, it's it's so amazing to hear that journey, that how, from a lawyer to wanting to be an actor and then getting into directing. And I think another actor that is probably better at directing than acting is Ben Affleck, right? Like
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
movies that he direct are amazing, but the ones that he act in are okay. It's like, this way or that way. So
I
it's
agree.
fascinating.
Yeah. I
Um, go on.
no, no, you please go ahead.
No, no, I was literally going to jump on the next question, but you had a thought. I
No,
would
no,
love for you
no,
to.
no, it'll come back. Go ahead.
Okay. So you did all that, and then I think you got into the world of television. You worked on Alias, which was a very popular TV series in the 90s, by J.J. Abrams and all other stuff. So, directing is one thing, but figuring out directing into films or television, was that an organic journey, or was that by choice?
Well, it was organic in the sense that one thing led to the next, but it was not planned. And when I determined to be a director, my dream and hope was to be a feature director because, I was weaned on the great films of the, independent cinema of the 70s and 60s and 70s. And, that was my thought and at that time, TV directing wasn't really taken very seriously as an artistic form. So my first job was a feature film, which was I made my short in 1982, and I was hired in 84 to direct Stephen King's Silver Bullet. And
Mm,
I'm not particularly a horror film buff, but what I'm always drawn to is story and character. And I think the best horror films do have, good stories and good characters, but they're not, but they also traffic in a lot of sensational stuff, which isn't so much my interest. But I took the job because it was an entry level film, and uh, I was a bit at war or at odds, shall we say, with the producer, who was a very famous producer at the time named Dino De Laurentiis, who made a lot of spectacles, made a lot of personal films too. He worked with Fellini in Fellini's earlier career too. But I saw Silver Bullet as a film that I thought I could really make into a really wonderful kids adventure, and yet Dino wanted a very hard R-rated thing with a lot of violence happening every other scene. So it was a bit of a schizophrenic experience, and I think the film reflected that. Although I gotta say, no matter what job I go to, there's a whole cult following around that film. But I made the film and then was offered other horror films, which I did not want to do. And I wanted my next feature to be something more reflective of my sensibility. And I became so choosy that I rejected a lot of things, but I did not have I had such a kind of critical voice in my head saying, not that, not that, not that. And I always thought I'd develop something on my own. I did get a few development deals, but nothing really came to fruition. But during that process, I was offered some television. And as I say, at the time, it really wasn't regarded as a significant medium artistically.
yeah.
But well, this will be my chance to develop as a director. So I started working And my early jobs included a lot of the original Beverly Hills 90210. I directed like 20 of those. So, I mean, I really got a chance. You know, you don't learn to be a good director by not directing. You got to get in there, try,
Yeah.
imagine things and then try it and see how it works out. Have the experience of directing, scenes and working with individual different actors and different crew and all that. So it was a great training ground. And while I was doing that, something called the golden age of television kind of grew. And I was being very selective about feature projects to get involved with and rejecting most and not being offered the really great stuff because obviously I wasn't an A director at that point. Um, but I was fortunate in that I got to work on a lot of really, really great shows. And then after a few years, I got involved with the first season of The Sopranos, which really opened up for me a lot. I directed several of those. I became a producer director on some other good show called Party of Five, but I worked on a lot of the early HBO shows, The Sopranos, The Wire.
Mm.
I did many episodes of The Wire, directed 6 Feet Under and Deadwood. And these were all great shows, far surpassing, I thought, in quality any feature I was looking at. And I actually, wrote a book about my experiences, and it's called Directing Great Television, which just came out a few years ago. And it kind of charts my journey, and I share a lot of stories about um, just the kind of questions you ask, like what is the difference between feature directing and episodic directing, series directing. Um, so I grew to really love that, and it became, I mean, I still, keep my hand. I look at, I check out things, but there's so many things I love about series television that it's really, you don't get the ego strokes that you get as being the director of a feature film because, right, fairly or unfairly, directors are kind of credited as being auteurs of feature films, when in reality, there's tremendous collaboration. There are some true auteurs directing feature films. But television is much more collaborative art and much more um, you have to blend you have to meld your vision with the showrunner's vision. You have to work a lot more quickly. And that really suited me because I loved, the shows I mentioned that I worked on. And I've been fortunate to stay working on popular shows for, 30 or 40 years. I've worked on, on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, on The Americans, on Homeland, on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, on The Boys, and right up to this present day. And it's a wonderful experience for me because I really regard it as a growth experience. It's like every show is its own world. And I know you have an interest in Lost, and I'm sure we're going to discuss that. But that's a perfect example of a very unique uh, creation, a whole world you're entering when you go in to be this. And as the director, you come in when you're directing an episode, you have to be the storyteller. You have to take full responsibility for being able to tell a story with all the parameters, all the givens, all the rules, all the conventions of a particular show. And so you have to totally immerse in that and essentially learn a new way of seeing. It's not as if you're just going to create a feature film and this is how I see it. I'm going to just do it. No, you're entering a world where there's a whole set of expectations already there in place. And the audience and the viewers, they're entering that world. So you are the guardian of it when you're directing it. You have to know its rules, know how it sees, know what the sensibility is. Not so that you can mimic it, but so that you can take responsibility for it. I think of it as like learning a language so you can speak it in your voice. Not just you're using different vocabulary, but you have to come through if you're going to offer anything. If you're going to make an episode worth viewing, you have to get impassioned about it. You have to find something you personally care about because I feel if I don't if I can't care about something, I can't make you as an audience member care about it because as a director, I'm always my one of my philosophies of directing is, I have to be both at every moment, both director and storyteller, but also audience. So I can experience, what the viewer is experiencing at each moment. So I can be sure where they are, that they're in position to understand the story, that they're in the right subjective state for something to land, for example. So so my passion grew for series television, and the variety and the possibilities that it's a real opportunity to enrich your own experience and to grow personally. So that's one of the reasons I really love it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned some of the names of the shows, which sadly I haven't seen and they've been on my list to watch it. Like in the 90s, like Buffy Vampire Slayer was something that everybody in the school would talk about. Then I remember The Sopranos, 6 Feet Under. Like HBO actually completely changed the way television was made. Like what you see on Netflix now or Apple TV was initiated by HBO. I mean, they took a bold step.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
Sopranos changed everything, right?
Oh,
Even though I haven't seen it, which I have to see it. I know it's like long overdue, but I know that Sopranos changed everything.
sure did.
Um, and you know, I remember, and we'll kind of swingle back and forth between different stuff, but just specifically, not specifically about Lost, but just in terms of what you said about um as a director, like there's a series that it had this world that it has its own rules, right? Whatever that series is. But let's take Lost, for example. I remember when Lost I was watching Lost. I was probably just finishing some of my film school courses that I was just taking on the side to get myself going um, in terms of storytelling. And I remember when I was watching Lost, I used to wonder why isn't because the way that they would market is like from executive producer J.J. Abrams and all that stuff. So in my head was J.J. Abrams directed every single episode like at the time. And then I started seeing like, different directors' name popping up. And I used to ask myself, how is it that you have all these different people who are directing, but the actual vision and the characters and everything, the arc of the story is so weaved together? Like, how do you make that happen? Right. And especially the two episodes that you directed, I think it was season one, episode 18, called uh numbers was it
Numbers.
and then season six episode something I forget 15 or 16 and it was about Hugo and how the arc of all that sort of
So was
connects.
both of the
Sorry.
ones both were about Hugo.
Yeah,
The
they're
first,
both about Hugo. Yeah. I
yeah.
I actually just saw them again right now before I started talking to you. And it was kind of interesting watching those two episodes because I've seen the series twice, once by myself, once with my wife. And just watching those two episodes one after the other, it was just amazing to see that how connected they were without me even having to watch anything else in between.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how and my I guess my quest it's more of a comment, but more of a question is like how Lost was one of those series which was so interconnected, right? Like you figure, how did they figure this out? That's in episode season one and episode season six. What was that like? Was there like a big like roadmap that you guys had?
Well,
I mean, I know you only did.
yeah, you raise a lot of really interesting questions, and I'd love to answer all of them. But
Please.
let's start with this last one that you asked. Lost was so and let me also pair that in talking about that, pair it with Alias, which were my Alias was my first J.J. Abrams show I did.
Yeah.
And in fairness, Lost was much more a creation of Damon Lindelof than
Yeah.
JJ did the pilot, directed the pilot.
Yeah.
But my experience on both, and I did an episode, the first season of Lost and the last season of Lost. And so I saw the beginning of it and the ending of it. And JJ was certainly a consultant and he read everything. But JJ was very respectful of the fact that it was Damon's show. And I'm sure he gave notes and stuff on the scripts, but it was very much his. But there is something that is very similar in the sensibility of both Damon and JJ. I was amazed on Alias first, right? That was a few years before Lost, how it had a very intricate plot, as did Lost. It's like there are all these plot developments that would happen. Oh my God, that's like he's her father. No, oh my God, the mother's alive. It's like things that you never would. You're constantly having the rug pulled out from under you about all your assumptions, and that was part of what was exciting. But what was amazing to me about JJ, unlike me, for example, if I were running a show, I mean, my need as a director, I really want to be on top of the story because, I want to be in control of everything that gets communicated and make sure that everything that's getting communicated is enhancing the experience of the story. So, I mean, that's one of the chief jobs I view as of the director. It's like if you don't really fully know the story, and if you don't have a sophisticated, interesting, deep understanding of the story, you're not going to be as good a director because you're not going to tie things together. You're going to miss thousands of opportunities where when you're staging a scene or watching a scene play out or how an actor is playing things, if you're not having awareness of everything that's going on, you're not going to sense, there's an opportunity here. I can enhance that little beat. I can enhance that storyline. I can set up something, oh, that's going to happen later. It's going to make that moment play better if this happens now. You have to be thinking of all those things to tell a good story, to tell a good episode. A lot of people can watch an episode and they'll think, yeah, it's an episode. It's fine. It just didn't affect me that much. It can be the writing is bad, but it can also be that the director was just not in command of what story he or she was telling, that it's just you're not aware of it. Well, I mean, the thing I always try to do when I enter a story directing, I really want to have as much information as possible about what's going to happen and when, and so that I can manipulate things. Well, JJ on Alias, he was constantly willing to just make something happen that he thought, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? And it's like, yeah, maybe, but then you have to think, but how is that going to affect all these other things at play? He would not, he would have complete faith. I'll solve that later. And, I remember, I think I did on Alias, the first season, I think I did about the sixth episode or something. And there were so many really interesting things happening. And I would compliment JJ. I said, God, it's so cool. This reveal of this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. And then he says, oh, yeah, well, you know where we're going to end the show. And I said, what? He says, I forget what it was. It had something to do with her parents. If you remember Alias, I don't remember even that well. Although, by the way, I hear there might be a reboot of Alias. Um,
Oh,
someone told me that who was the involved with the first season, and she said, I hear that JJ might want to revive it. So I don't know. That would be exciting. But he gave me some amazing plot twist about like Sydney Bristow, that's Jennifer Gardner's character. Her whole character was contingent. I forget how it started, but that her father was an asshole. He rejected her mother who died, and she's alienated from her father. And then in the course of the series, then she becomes tightly bound to her father because she sees, oh, he wasn't a bad guy. And then, oh my God, he is a bad guy. And oh my God, and it's like, and I heard, we're gonna learn the mother's alive or something that just upset everything you knew. And I thought, oh, what a great season finale that's gonna be. That's just gonna be great. She says, yeah. And then about 5 days later, I get a new draft of the next script, which I like to read anyway, even though I wasn't directing it. And he had pulled that up to the next episode. He said, "Oh, we're going to find out next episode that this is what happened." The thing that he had originally thought would be a great, 18 episodes later, we'll have that happen. He decided he liked it so much. He said, "Let's just have it now happen." And then it's like, what happened to your whole conception of the season then? It's like, where do you go? You're into season 2 now on episode 8 or something, and it's like, he says, yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And it was like constantly, the image I had is like he was constantly sawing off the branch he was sitting on. He's sitting on a tree, and it's like, if you can imagine, he's sawing off that branch and he's going to fall, but he trusted in his own creative powers to figure it out. And that is a very exciting way to work, but it can also lead to problems. I mean, you could argue that Lost, people who are unhappy with the last episode might say, well, you can't keep kicking the can down the road about how it all ties together. You just end it arbitrarily. Some people felt that way. Some people loved the ending. So I'm not saying that, but it's just risky. Okay, so now come to Lost. And Damon is in the same category as JJ. And um, I'll tell you, it's funny, in the first season, when you do a series show, one of the great things about series as opposed to features is you have a long-term relationship with the actors and the characters. A
yeah.
feature is, okay, this is what it is. This is who we're casting. This is the story. Ready, go, boom. We got to complete it. And if there's bad chemistry between the leads, I mean, you can recast and reshoot, but that's pretty hard. Uh, Something just have to bite the bullet, and then the movie comes out. Yeah, it wasn't so good. I didn't really believe that guy wasn't sexy, or she wasn't, I didn't believe she would have liked him, or whatever. It's like, but you're stuck with it. And so you play these scenes. Well, in television, you can adjust to, like I started, a lot of my early episodic directing was in Beverly Hills 90210. And I don't know if your viewers will remember that. It was a long time ago. It came out, started out in the early 90s.
Hmm.
But, at that point, the Shannon Doherty became, sadly, she passed away recently, but, she became Brenda, the kind of vixen who everybody like she was very conniving and manipulative. Well, it didn't start out that way. The story of Beverly Hills 90210 was originally, and the pilot was, uh, a really salt of the earth, down to earth, work middle class family from Minnesota decides to move to Beverly Hills, and they were the fishes out of water. And Brenda, played by Shannon Doherty, was the sweet girl who lived with her brother, and Jason Priestley played him. And that the next door neighbor or the friend was Kelly, who was like a stuck-up Beverly Hills kind of, spoiled character. Well, they started doing the scene, and they turned out that Shannon Doherty had much more of that. That was much more in her wheelhouse to be the conniving kind of one. And the girl, the young actress who played Kelly, Jennifer Garner, was, oh no, I forget her name. I'm blanking, played Kelly. Uh, she was a very sweet girl. And so you sense that. And they'd write the early scenes where they were saying this dialogue. And then they realized we have to reverse how we write these characters. So they completely flipped it. And then Shannon Doherty became a huge hit as being this kind of, dangerous character. So in Lost, um, they did not think of Hurley as being a significant character. He was kind of this guy who was kind of serviced the story and all that. And they started doing the episodes, and in Lost that there was a lovely device that each episode would kind of have a backstory of one of the characters. You'd go back.
Yeah.
And I came along to Lost, like, I think it was about well, you just saw it. I think it was about the 18th episode or something like that. It was
Yeah, the
deep,
first season was the 18th episode. Yeah.
yeah, deep, deep into the first season. And Hurley was one of the only characters who had not had a backstory episode yet. It's like several of the characters had multiple ones. Like Matthew Fox's character, you saw a lot about him, and the Korean couples, you saw a lot about them. And, the things that the writers obviously figured out early on. Oh, this will be interesting. We'll have this, we'll have that. But Hurley, I'm not even sure if he wasn't cast just because they were watching Curb Your Enthusiasm, and this big overweight guy was kind of a guy standing outside the jury selection room when Larry David comes out, and he sells him, I don't know, he gets him to take him to a Dodger game or something, and he was just hilarious. And they said, let's put him in Lost. It'd be fun to have on the airplane. And so on the island. And so Hurley comes in, and he's just got this incredible droll deadpan delivery, and they had never thought of him as a key character. And so they had never thought even of his backstory. But now he was taking fans were really liking his character, and they said, okay, we got to give him a backstory. What the hell is his backstory? And when I was in prep, they weren't even sure what it was going to be. And prep, your audience should know, it's like, you get about a week and a half of
Mhm.
the script's supposed to be given to you, and then you have a week and a half to get it ready, and then you shoot it for about 2 weeks. And they came up with this idea at the last minute. Like, oh, what if he won the lottery and these numbers or something? They came up with this idea. And I was there watching it and happen. It was just, pulled out of their rear end. It's like, let's do that. And they had fun with it, and they did it. The episode comes out, and oh my God, the explanations for the numbers were unbelievable. I think they were 6 digits or something. And people said,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the it's all of the great Yankee players from, oh, Lou Gehrig's number 24 and it's like, you know, it's like the explanations were unbelievable. And the writers were sitting there, great, this is great. This people are so interested. We'll figure out what it is. So, in terms of your question, did they have something in mind? I don't think they did. I know they had a kind of rough, I don't know, maybe it'll be purgatory, maybe it'll be what, but they didn't know. They just kept trusting, we'll figure it out. Like, like in the beginning episodes, there was like the snowman or the monster. It's like that was not a significant thing in the story.
Yeah.
They dropped that, it's like it's not like they had figured out. And JJ, who directed the pilot, he said something very funny too, which is he said, all of us were sure this show was never going to get picked up. It was just way too, out of the box. And so we just had fun with it. Let's do this. Let's have a monster in the thing and let's have that happen. They would just throw it, not having any idea what this master plan, as you asked if there was one, not a chance, not a chance. So it was quite amazing how they would really, figure it out as they went along. So there you go.
That's so amazing. It's called, I mean, it's about like the believing in yourself and also about the great writing, right? Like, because when you watch, like when I watched Lost again with my wife after like 10, 15 years, whatever that was, I was just trying to figure out all those connections. And even the second time, it became way more interesting that how it was done, which is fine. I will believe in that, that's it was conceptualized from the beginning to end. And for but the most amazing part of Lost was, that the backstories and how they weave that into the current moments. And I know two scenes, I mean, there's so many moments, but two scenes that really, really hit home in terms of emotions. Was I think it was the ending of season 3 when or 4 when they're Jack meets Kate at the airport in the future or in the present, whatever, and they're by the airport and he says, "I want to go back. We need to go back." Like that moment, that how you were trying all this time to get off the island, and now their life is there was a purpose there, and now life has no purpose. You're alcoholic, and now you want to go back. I mean, that is just such a I think it's such a deep scene that it really spoke volumes about how all of our lives are. Like the purpose thing is so important, even if you're in the shittiest times in life, right? Like I think purpose is just so significant to have. And the other scene was when Sawyer reveals to Jack, I think it was in the last couple of seasons, that he met this guy at a bar who was a doctor and he was proud of his son, and it turned out to be Jack's dad. I mean, there's just such amazing moments, but those two scenes really spoke volumes to me in terms of connecting and hooking you as an audience member.
Well, I think it's the creative process is so fascinating. I've spent a lot of my life considering it. And there are different ways of being. I wanted to just mention in passing that
Sure.
one of the shows, maybe you haven't watched that one either, but many people consider it with The Sopranos as maybe one of the best shows ever made. It was The Wire, which I had a great good fortune of working on 4 of its 5 seasons. And uh, that was diametric. The creator of that, David Simon, uh, that was diametrically opposed to this. They knew from the very beginning we're going to make 5 seasons. The first season is going to treat this. The second season is going to treat this. Third season is going to treat this. Whether it's like how the drugs and the police trying to wiretap. Second season, how do they come in? And we're going to do the docs. And the third season going to be like, I forget what it was, but like the school system and how the young, the systemic whole analysis. And that, so that at the very beginning, he knew exactly where he was starting. And the show was threatened with cancellation each year because nobody was really watching it. But he kept coming in and making his case to HBO. No, you got to stay with us. It's going to be great. So there's all different ways of being creative, but television is really fascinating to me in so many ways because it's really collaborative creativity, and you get when you really are willing to ask questions and not have the answers all right away. That's when things come from a deeper place and unexpected places. And then when you put a collection of creative people together, like in a writer's room, I can just imagine how those discussions occurred that, oh, why don't we have a scene where this happens? And you bring your own experience of life, and then you say, yeah, I mean, just like you say about an alcoholic wanting to go back to that time, or, it's like, yeah, it was terrible and painful, but it also made me feel more alive than I've ever felt, or rid of my existential angst that nothing means anything, or whatever it might be. And everybody gets to kind of, what if we do this? And then people kind of, respond to it. And there's a kind of collective wisdom that can happen in the best of circumstances. So I have found that, I wrote a book, which I hope some of your viewers might, if they're interested in any of these topics. It's, directing great television. And I really talk about so many of these topics. And one of the things I do talk about too is the mystery of how creative solutions kind of come about. And that's one of the things I say is, what I valued in directing series television, because it's an odd thing. It's like, unlike, say, a feature that you've developed yourself, it's like as a director, you're called upon to take responsibility for the storytelling. And you can't know everything going in. You have to be trusting of answers that will come to you as you're in the process of doing it, based on so many factors, including that you don't control. There's so many things you don't control, like the mood of the actors, or even the very cast themselves. They may, you haven't cast everybody, or you choose somebody and you don't. Everybody's a mystery. You don't know how they're going to respond to something, and then it's your job to blend with them and not just say, okay, whatever you want to do is fine. That's bad directing, I think. A lot of people take that as being, oh, I'm being creative. I'm just letting loose. Well, no, there has to be, I believe, a guiding, someone. That's what the director's job is to assess moment to moment how the story is landing, where it's going. Is it a good choice? Is it bad direction? Is it the right direction? Can we trust this intuitive thing? And then you hope your instincts are rewarded, but often they're not, and then you have to adjust to that. Um, and in series television, unlike features, so you're asked to hold the vision, to take responsibility for the telling, but you're also aware that you're serving another's vision. You're serving the vision of the showrunner, that
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean, this is a big mistake a lot of, I think, people have, and some directors have, and it leads to not great television or not great episodes, is like when you think, well, I'm just going to do whatever they tell me, or I'm going to just do what I think they want. That's, when you're cut off from your own, you have to own it. You have to figure out a way. Okay, here's this person's vision. I get it. But I have to then connect it with my vision. I have to, and it's like, so I'll have a take on a story, on a script, and then I'll need to check it with the right. Now tell me, what's the point of view of this scene? What were the deeper levels you were working at? And then often it's an exchange. I'll say, I really respond to this side of that. I'd like to go a little further with this. What do you think? If they say no, you have to accept that. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want to be invited back, if you want to connect, And so then you're faced with a situation of, how can I newly perceive this set of circumstances or this story? How can I find my way into it, given, you know, and it's like the best directing is, I think, and I think the good showrunners understand this. They want the creative contributions of somebody else, because I can take it maybe in a direction they might not have thought, which actually enhances the first idea they started with. And it even goes, and then you have to also, you're pass it along as well, because same thing applies when I, as a director, am working with actors. I'll have an understanding of where I think the scene needs to be, or even how it should be done. And an actor, and more often than not, I'm working with the actor to get them to make that their own and do what I want them to do. But there may be times when the actor has a very different take. Well, there's often at times when they have a different take, and I'd say more often than not, I'm working with the actor to try to get them to kind of reconceive things so that they're in the story I'm trying to tell. But sometimes they do something that, if I'm open to it, I see that's better. Oh, that's interesting. I had never thought of that. So, it's like you have to be open to the contributions of others to make, and then the result, when people are truly working together and are true to their own instincts, but also open to being affected by somebody else's, that's when you can really create something, I think, really exciting.
Yeah. No, it's true. To your point about taking someone else's vision and making it your own. This is just my opinion. In terms of Star Wars, after episode one, two, three, Jar Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, and anything that has come out after that to me has been a rehash of all the other films that's already been done. I'm not talking about the series, I'm just talking about the film. Except, in my view, the Rogue story, the one that was directed by Gareth Edwards. It was
I'm
very,
not,
very
I'm not familiar with that, but
okay.
please yeah, yeah.
But it was just it just Gareth Edwards is I don't know if you've seen any of his work. His first film was called Monsters, which he shot around the world about an alien invasion with like five or six people, and with incredible visual effects, and that's what got Hollywood's attention. He got Hollywood's attention from that film, and he did Godzilla, and he did Rogue One, Star Wars Rogue One. It was received so Disney wasn't happy with it, but the fans loved it because it had its own voice as well as it was still Star Wars. And that's what Gareth, in my view, does. He's just one, there's other directors out there too, but there's just some directors who have that. And maybe some other directors have that too, but they just, I don't know, they fall under pressure of studio or, I mean, it's not easy
No, it's
deal.
it's complicated because,
Yeah.
some people are just not connected to the material, and then they have to fall back on, okay, well, I'm not connected, so how am I going to get through this? I'll do what they did. I'll figure it out. And they're
Yeah.
and it's kind of feels like what you described as rehashed. Other directors uh get inspired, but that doesn't mean they're right. They may be whack. They may be inspired to make a film, and they're just not very interesting, and they've ruined it. Other directors, other people who, have a facility to connect to something in a deep way and absorb it, and it comes through them in a new way, but they stay connected to the original material, but not slavishly and not like
Yeah.
imitatively. And suddenly something organic comes out that has a chance, certainly not always, but has a chance of being great. And that may have been the
Yeah.
case. And so I find in my work, you know, uh, some of the most exciting times when I've directed have been when I have uh, been able to take a story, having to something can be very creatively rewarding about accepting limitations. A lot of directors famously have said, "Oh, if only I could just make whatever I want and not be guided by the studio and not be told this and not be told that." And they get their chance, and it's just like this self-indulgent mess that doesn't have anything. Whereas
Yeah.
other directors have taken what seem to be terribly onerous, strict limitations, and then they're very creative within it, and they make a virtue of what was perceived as, it's like, you know, I think of Coppola and The Godfather and all the, interference with, the studios and all these, all right, and he winds up making this genius work. Well, in a much more reduced way, it's like I regard, when I get a script I don't really care for, or a showrunner who has what I think is a pretty uninteresting understanding of what could be happening, and I ask for a rewrite, say, and they say, no, 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 we want it this way. And it's frustrating because I know I have to do it that way because that's the job. You know,
Mhm.
but then if I stay with it long enough and really ask myself the questions, how could I care about this more? Okay, I can't change any of the dialogue. I can't, I have to, I know they care about something emotional happening. I've got to honor that and make that happen. But how could I rethink this? How could I rethink what's going on more deeply within the characters that could make it a story I find compelling? And I have a couple of chapters in my book, one in an episode of the Americans, which I think was a great show, where I
Mhm.
had a real problem with it. And I love that show and I love those showrunners. But they had, in this particular instance, they had written a scene that I thought interrupted the flow of everything. And I kept, how can we make this? I'm afraid we're going to lose the audience. I'm afraid nothing's really happening in it. And when I questioned them, they gave me to understand, well, we think the scene is about this, but really what we have to do is the scene's not important. We have to really just introduce this character in this scene because in the next episode, that character is gonna XYZ. And it's like I say, okay, I get it. So I'm serving the bigger picture now, but I'm treating the story as my little film. I got to make it work on its own. And as I stressed and stressed and stressed about it, just within myself, how can I make this work? At the very last minute, I figured out a way that really excited me and actually made the scene really relevant to all kinds of themes. And it's like the showrunners were delighted when I told them about it. And, and to their credit, it's like, and this is an instance where, some people, as a director, you're doing a lot, or actors, I'm sure have this experience too. You make sense of something that isn't really there on the page, but you make sense of it and it turns out really compelling. And then the writers say, oh yeah, of course, that's what I wrote. Well, that's what you wrote, but you were not aware that this was a buried treasure within it if someone really dug deeply enough. And so that works in a lot of ways. And the thing that I want to also mention is it's creativity is so interesting. It's like it's not all conscious that, it's like in both. I also wrote a chapter about an episode of Homeland, which is another great show. And I love those writers too, but I had a real problem with this episode I was given to direct. They didn't want to change it. And I worked on it and just stressed about it and came up again with some way to understand that I thought really helped. Um, but I remind myself in those times, I wouldn't have arrived at that new understanding if they hadn't written it exactly as they'd written it. So in some way, it's in the zeitgeist. They weren't even aware that that was a possibility that they had given me to understand it, so that what we're consciously aware of what we're creating is just a fraction of the potential of it.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about collaborative creativity when it really works well.
So true. Homeland is something that I've seen. I think I've seen the first couple of seasons, which I remember I saw Homeland at probably the worst possible place. I watched it in an airport in a 12-hour span while waiting for my flight with explosions going off and terrorist attacks going off. And here I am sitting at the airport watching the show.
Wait a
But
minute, who's the terrorist on this plane? Yeah, right.
but I think limitations are so important. And in my experience too, the films that I have directed, my now I'm getting in the narrative world, but I've done like narrative doc features and stuff, and where limitations, as annoying as they are, I've found myself over and over again, that's where the best stuff comes out. It's just incredible that how your brain is forced to figure it out as opposed to given a blank check. And then you're not challenging
So
yourself.
we all develop our own habits, and when we're just
Yeah.
creating out of habitual stuff, it's not as good. It's not fresh anymore. It's been done before. It's like you want to, everything is unique. Everything is unique. Every story is unique. It's like people say, well, these actors have done this. I say, yeah, but they haven't acted this story, this moment in this story ever before. It's
Yeah. It's
unique. It's like they haven't, what their scene partner has never been this person. The character they're relating to, it may be a girlfriend, and they had a girlfriend in other seasons, but this is a unique human being. It calls forth different things. If you just say, yeah, 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 that's the girlfriend. This is how I act with girlfriends. You're not engaged, and therefore the audience isn't engaged. They may think they are for a while, but it doesn't last. Whereas if you really get a sense of everybody being involved with a particular and unique situation and a particular and unique scene partner and a particular and unique moment in their own internal life that's never happened before because they're changing all the time. If you
yeah.
can get those things to happen, that's when you have something kinetic and alive. If you can't, it's like people are watching it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah. And the audience often wants things they've seen before. They don't, you have to risk upsetting them. Oh, I want to see it when this guy does that great thing where he always does this, well, what if he doesn't that time? You're going to be disappointed, but maybe you're going to see something new.
Yeah,
It's
it's true.
yeah. So
It is so true. I can't tell you how. So this is just again my experience. One of the things that I never signed up to make documentaries. I just sort of how landed in that world, and now I've always wanted to make narratives, and now I'm getting into that world. But one of the things that I've learned now in the last 12 years, now that I'm working on a narrative, is that there was a purpose that I did this, because what that allowed me to do, among many other things, one particular thing was, I have the protagonist and I have an antagonist. And I don't know much about the antagonist in the beginning when I'm starting the project. I know about the protagonist, but as the film unravels, kind of like Dancing with the Wolves effect or Last Samurai effect, like where you start to understand the other side in a way that you probably never imagined, even if they're crazy and even if they're wrong. And that empathy kicks in. And I think that has sort of allowed me, because of that challenge, to be able to try to, whenever I'm writing something, I need to know what the antagonist is based on, how I've actually met these real people for the films that I've directed. So it's a very fascinating process. I mean, you obviously have immense amount of experience, and I love that you talked about all these different things, and including your book, which I would love to read, and I would love to have you on again to talk about that book if that's something you're up for.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love it. I want to put a plug in. This is the
Please
cover.
do.
Directing Great Television Inside TV's New Golden Age. It's really not just for directors. It's really a process of, you know, one of my notions about directing is you have to find yourself in the film. You have to connect, you have to find what you can care about. You have to find what questions the story is raising in you. So it's really so much a journey of self-exploration and
Yes.
self-discovery about how does this make me feel? And then where does this point me to? And what would I like to learn more about? It's a series of asking questions. So I've had people read it who aren't directors at all, but really regard it as a really, and it's my sharing. It's like putting you in the chair next to me. It's like I try to recreate situations I had, and I said, this was the problem, this was the challenge, and I didn't have the answer to it. I didn't know, so I thought, well, how could I, it's like it's that kind of a story, and it's, hopefully for the talk about a lot of episodes people have seen and loved. But what people, I hope, emerge from the reading the book and the experiences, it's like, you see a story you see a TV show or a film that you think is great, and you think, oh, that's just how it was. What a great experience. And you realize, no, it was created. It wasn't, it's like, how did you get there? It's
Yeah.
like, there's an infinite number of choices that have to be made at every point because you're trying to create a subjective experience. So I try to, and if you make one choice, it's going to point the audience one way. If you make another choice, it's going to point them somewhere else. So it's a series of choices and gambles and finding out what you care about, what you don't care about, editing it when you like, monitoring yourself and putting yourself in the place of the audience. And then it's an act of communication. So when people see movies and TV shows now, I think they might emerge with a much more of a sense of wow, how did they create the effect that they had on me? It's like, because they opened me up to something. How did that happen? and
Yeah.
and it's so I hope people will have a look at it. So
Yeah, I truly believe, and again, this is my own experience, storytelling, whether it's writing a book, making a documentary, TV show, feature film, whatever it is an act of therapy for yourself, for your
oh
crew, and for the audience, and that's it. Like it's such I have learned so much about myself in the last 12 years. And every time I'm making a film or working that I probably don't in other times when I'm just sort of, doing the regular things that we all do. But it's just an amazing thing
Well, I
where you,
think of it too, right in line with that. I think of it as like I realize the thing that motivates me more than anything else is I want to finally get to the point of being authentic. What is real?
right.
So that you have a situation where you start a story and something hasn't come out yet. And okay, how can we get clarity? How can we start with confusion and arrive at this feels like that's the truth about this character. This is the truth. And it's like the best films and stories are when you have a personal stake in that too. And you're making those discoveries right along with the cast. And you're helping with the camera to help shape how a viewer sees the story. It's like it's not just you have to be minutely attuned to where your audience is receiving stuff. A lot of times, not enough attention. I have a whole chapter about creating the world of your story, which is to say how important it is to contextualize things for people so they can follow what you're saying. It's like think of a joke. if you just tell a joke badly, you can just say all the information in the joke and say the punchline at the wrong time. And it's
Mm,
like, isn't that funny? And no one laughs. Why not? Well, you're not setting up the audience.
yeah.
Okay, what's the belief you're suggesting? What's the turn? And if you miss any of those steps, it lands flat, and people think that's a bad joke, when it's really just the telling of the joke that was bad.
Yeah.
And in
Um,
directing a show, you have to be really demanding. I find I have to be really demanding of myself to be perfectly honest and deal with the frustration of not having it yet. God, no, it's not it. It's not landing. That moment I keep watching that scene and it's not affecting me. Why not? And it's like, I know the writing's okay. It's like, well, maybe the writing isn't okay. Well, no, let's go back here and then you have to work with the actors. What aren't you thinking about? Because it's like scenes aren't about the text, they're about the subtext. They're about what does the character want? We rarely speak our truth. It's like we have agendas that most often, we're not even conscious of. We want to be liked, or we want to be feared, or we want to impress that potential sexual partner, or it's like we have things that are motivating us that affect how we present ourselves that may be below consciousness. Well, as a director, you have to help the actor find those deeper meanings and deal with, it's like it really requires you to look in yourself and ask yourself constantly, how does this make me feel? And to be able to tolerate not having the answer yet and to still stay with it because of this drive you and I share of wanting to get to something true. There's so much that's unclear in our lives. There's so much
yeah.
we're unhappy with. There's so much ignorance we have even about ourselves, especially about ourselves. We'd like to arrive at who am I? What, or who, what would make me happy? Or why do I behave the way I don't like that? And how can I change? I'll just change. No, I can't. Gee, I keep doing the same thing. God damn it. Why? Why? And then you start to open up and you start to see, oh, that's not the way that, I have to admit I'm not good at this. And what would make me good? It's just a constantly humbling experience. And that's why it's a privilege to get to do it.
Amazing. That's really good to hear. And again, Dan, thank you so much for your time. I would love to have you on again, talk about your book, and maybe we can talk about other shows. I'm probably gonna watch The Wire and Sopranos in the next coming couple of
Six feet,
months.
6 feet
Uh,
under is another great one.
yeah, I remember hearing about it a lot when it was out. So let me get to that whenever I'm traveling and I have a little bit of time. I'll try to catch up and
Next
we
time you
can
got
chat
12
about it.
hours in an airport. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I hope not. Thanks
Well,
again, Dan, for your time.
thank you, Joel.